Welcome to Profit Led, a podcast by and for bootstrapped founders brave or crazy enough to grow a business to profitability with very few resources. Profit Led is brought to you by eWebinar, the leading automated webinar platform built to save you from doing the same webinar over and over again, from sales demos to customer onboarding to training. This season, Profit Led's host Melissa Kwan, who is also co-founder and CEO of eWebinar, will walk you step by step through the company's journey to $1 million. Melissa is a 3-time bootstrapper who has spent 13 years building startups. Together with co-host and eWebinar COO Todd Parmley, they will dive into one major topic per episode, sharing war stories, mistakes, and lessons learned as they grew the company to $1 million in annual recurring revenue 36 months after product launch. So buckle up, fellow bootstrappers. It's gonna be one heck of a ride.
Welcome to Profit Led Season 2, our Journey to $1 Million, Episode 22. I'm Melissa Kwan, co-founder and CEO of eWebinar and your host, and I'm here with my co-host Todd Parmley, eWebinar's COO. Todd, can you believe that it's Episode 22?
22, it's palindrome. That's kind of nerd I am.
I think we're 22. Almost at the end of the season. Well, in the last episode, we talked about what it was like when our startup grew from concept to a real business, what it felt like, scaling issues we experienced, what we did with the product and our business as we got more and more customers. Today, we're going to talk about something completely unrelated to product, which was also one of my most controversial viral LinkedIn posts from last year. The 5 wrong hires we made that end up costing $450,000 because we didn't fire fast. So I'm excited to give more context to that post because LinkedIn is quite limited, the amount of characters. In fact, it was so controversial and people were so angry by that post, I had to write a follow-up post to diffuse that anger. So I'll definitely put that in the show notes for anyone that's curious to read the comments. It was interesting because people were so angry from it, mainly because the word fire fast really triggered them. And I did think to myself, should I delete this and rewrite it? But I also thought it was a good opportunity for me to demonstrate how I would handle this type of comments in public.
Yeah. And ultimately, and we'll talk about it, but that anger was understandable, but I would say misplaced, right? And so it was helpful to hear it, to clarify your point of view, right? Because there were things that I think you assumed people would understand, that especially that it was coming from this sort of generous place, but they did not. Yeah.
And it was also interesting where a lot of my posts, so LinkedIn gives you these analytics on who looks at it, not the person, but the demographic. And on most of my content, it's founders, sales, people from 1 to 50 or 50 to 200 person companies. But this one had a lot less of that. And a lot, it was individuals, it was a lot of engineers. So I think enough were were commenting that it just went another direction.
Yeah. And when there's a tough economy and, when there's inflation and a tough job market and you hear a CEO say firing fast is great, then you could easily misunderstand that.
Or we lost money because we didn't fire fast and people got really, and the reality is I didn't realize that people would think that way because the word fire fast is so widely used in the industry. That's what every VC tells you to do, right? It's the move fast and break things, which I don't like that quote, but it's almost the same. But maybe backtrack a bit, talk about those 5 wrong hires. And, the hires we're talking about aren't necessarily individual people, but it could be a company or a type of person. So going back to, this is all chronological. So going back to the very beginning, and I've mentioned this multiple times on different episodes, is I came into eWebinar not wanting a co-founder and CTO. So I thought that I could hire a dev shop to be my CTO and product while I can focus on what I do best, which is selling and creating and business. So I hired a friend's dev shop to be in place of a CTO. And we worked with them for almost a year, I think just under a year. And I spent about $250K on that project before we had to end that relationship because, I mean, so many reasons, but ultimately the software wasn't working. So I think a lot of dev shops are great, going from 0 to 1. Dev shops are not good from going from 0 to 1. They're good from going to 1 to 2, but not 0 to 1. And I was trying to rely on them to go from 0 to 1, which requires actually a lot of testing. And testing, not product testing. It's like we integrate with a certain platform and like a vendor, and that vendor doesn't work. We have to actually do another one, but they're not motivated to redo things because they want to get to the next milestone and get paid. So our agreement was that we would pay them in 4 different milestones. So their motivation was not doing the best work. It was getting to the milestone fastest. And that's not uncommon, right, for dev shops. But we also could not hire like dev shops where we like own the person's full time because I needed to know, like I had a limited amount of money I could spend on getting this started. And I couldn't have an undefined timeline and an undefined amount of time for me to get this done. So a project, was spec'd based on what the product that I wanted to take out to market. I feel like we maybe reached 25-50% of that. But I think we paid for about 75% of that. So nobody felt like they were winning, right? I think at some point, like the software wasn't working. I don't know good software from bad software. I don't code, but I do know that good software works and bad software doesn't. And it just wasn't working. And because it was my friend's dev shop, they kept telling me they would fix it. And of course, I had no reason not to trust them, but it just wasn't getting fixed. And that's when David, my current co-founder and life partner, came in to help consult. He was a fractional CTO for someone else or for other companies. And he started coming in to help, seeing how things were built, giving his advice, started coding, just volunteering. Within a month of him coming in, the product started working. And that's when I knew that we had to end that relationship with the dev shop, and that it was so naive of me to think that I could build a tech company without a technical co-founder, without any technical knowledge of my own. And this is not an uncommon path that I think non-technical founders take, but it's definitely not a good path that anyone should take.
I mean, I think another thing that comes with like basically agency work, right? Hiring a dev shop to do something for you without a technical co-founder or somebody with kind of the big technical picture in mind is that they build things to work in the moment. They don't build them to scale. They don't build them so that you can build things on top of them. It's like a very fragile infrastructure, right? And I remember David talking about that when he first looked in. He was like, this is really fragile code that will have to be rewritten almost immediately. And so, that's the other thing you don't see if you don't know what to look for, right? You don't know that not only it's like the quality of the code in the immediate moment, but also that they're not building for any kind of future, right? They're just making it work.
And I think that's also a function of it's just hard to hire great developers. And a lot of developers just don't know how to do that. They're quite junior. They haven't worked on really complex products. They were told they need to build something and it needs to work like this. So in the end, maybe it works like that, but it doesn't, it just does that function. It can't really do more than that.
Yeah. And I would say that like a technical CEO, and again, I'm like you, I'm a non-technical person. Like I know enough to talk about things conceptually, but I'm a non-technical person ultimately. But you need someone who has a mind, who's a systems architect, right? Who understands how to envision the back end so that it will support the front end, like in perpetuity. And, you could only do so much at the beginning. Like we talked about that in the last episode, which is, you hit scaling issues that you can't anticipate. And then you have to sometimes go back and redo some things that you thought were scalable. But, I can't even tell you how many times I've worked on products that had to be completely rebuilt on the back end. And we have never had to do that since David came on board.
Yeah. And I guess I had a sneaking suspicion that this was not a great shop and that it wasn't going to work out, but it was my friend's shop. And, there's emotions involved in these hiring decisions, right? So you can't just rip the Band-Aid off, right? Like you want to give them a chance. You don't want to ruin that friendship. And in hindsight, always 2020, like we should have ended that relationship sooner so that they wouldn't have spent so much resource. Because at some point they were trying to hit the next milestone. It wasn't working. So then we couldn't pay them. And then we now bring in a third party to evaluate and judge their work, which wasn't great for that relationship either. So in hindsight, should have known better. But that's why we have this topic. Yeah. Number two was, it's not a single person. I am thinking of a single person when I'm writing this, but it's also like a small group of people, which I think a lot of people walk into as well. It's like the convenient person that you can afford. Like, I need something done. You're here, you're a friend or you're a friend's friend. Let's just get it done. Right. And I think as a bootstrap startup, we always feel like we need to make concessions by hiring who we can afford instead of like the best person for the task. And a lot of times we feel like, oh, if you're charging us this little money to do this, you're doing us a favor. But when that happens, when we compromise on quality, every time we compromise on quality, we've had to do it again. And sometimes it's not the quality of the work. Sometimes it's the quality of the person, right? We hire someone because they're right here and their work is great, but they're super hard to work with. But they're just there and they can do it today, not tomorrow.
Yeah, I think what compounds that is when you're starting out, you feel like everything feels so urgent that it also feels like you don't have time to like find, look at options or find people. It's like, no, I know, I asked one person, they said they could help. Let's just do it, and it's understandable because you have things you need to get done.
Yeah. And also like sometimes, I'm thinking of a particular case, but like I hired a friend's friend and, we've gone out before, like cool guy. There was no way I could have imagined him to be hard to work with, but when people are in work environments, they're totally different. They could be totally different people. And these are not big projects, right? Like we always hire people for a small task first. But what I realize is like, even that can be very damaging to a friendship. And not just the direct friendship. It's like the person who introduced us. And it all starts with because they were convenient, because we didn't spend the time to look for someone who was actually good for the job and was a good cultural fit, regardless of how little that task was.
And in the end, too, I would say this, it's always better if there's no strings attached, right? Like if it's not because when there's that emotional friendship component to it, those things can work. They can absolutely work. Right? I mean, they have worked. We were friends before, not great friends, but we were friends before we started working together. Yeah.
But we were business friends. So I do think there's a difference. Like my last co-founder I worked with for 10 years, we became friends over working together. But the first day of our relationship was like, he was my contractor. So I actually think that's the reason why that partnership worked for a decade, is because we were able to have a certain method of communication that didn't involve emotions of a friend. But in the end, we did learn from that after a few times, and we learned that we only hire people who are best for the job. We don't negotiate. We don't hire the cheapest. We don't hire most convenient. And if we can't afford to pay that person, we just move on, right? Like I don't believe someone's worth should be dependent on our ability to pay. In fact, I want to pay them what they ask so that they give me the best thing, right? There's a lot of consultants out there that I could just go for advice. Like now that my business network is quite large, and they would give it to me. But if they're giving me an hour of their time versus me paying, $650, $1,000 an hour for their time, they're not going to give me the same quality of work and attentiveness. So now that we can afford it, like I don't want any favors. I just want you to pay me so that we can actually treat this as a real project. And the third one, which we spend a lot of money on, I feel like, not just for this company, I spent a lot of money on in my last company because I never learn, is hiring agencies or consultants to fix something that, like to fix a pain that we didn't know anything about. So Yeah, I mean, on episode 13, we talked about like how we needed to own our SEO because agencies sucked. And that was, we hired a lot of marketing agencies because we were so desperate to fix our SEO and have more content. So we just hired a company and we said, just go do stuff. And I think we spent about $50K just doing that for eWebinar, but way more in my previous companies. But my previous companies were sales led. They were not marketing led. So the pain wasn't so felt. Yeah. As in eWebinar, like most agencies, even marketing agencies, not just dev shops, they can go from 1 to 2. If you have a template they can work from, if you have the messaging, if you already have some ads that work, they can iterate on it. But 0 to 1 is a testing phase. So I didn't realize that hiring a marketing agency this early on meant that they needed to test our language. And when we hired these companies, we hadn't even done our own research into who our own customers were and how they were using our product. So we were really relying on these agencies to figure out like, who are we? But that's the job of a founding team.
I mean, from my own point of view from this is, if you remember, you'd hired this SEO agency, right? I had gone away from eWebinar for a while to work a different job, right? Because there wasn't kind of money to pay me. And then I came back and this agency was running, it was full steam ahead, write this content, get it onto the web. I knew nothing about SEO. So I just came in as a executor. I was just getting stuff done. I was really pushing them to write as much content as possible. In the meantime, I was, trying to learn from them, about SEO for the first time, also, taking my own initiative to learn about it. But one of the biggest aha moments for both of us, I think, was when we had a meeting with them to talk about what does success look like with this? What is successful? And they were ultimately kind of stumped. Especially when we talked about how can we tie this to revenue, right? How can we get somebody to discover us through organic search and decide from what they read that they want to sign up for a trial? And I remember that was a big moment for us where we're like, oh, we have to figure this out ourselves. They're not going to be able to solve this problem for us. We have to find a way to educate ourselves and figure this out.
Yeah. And the agencies that I'm talking about here are it didn't limit to SEO agencies. It didn't limit to content agencies. We worked with a couple other companies for backlinking because we needed to appear on Google. Somebody just told me, you need backlinks. And I'm like, what is a backlink? And he's like, okay, call this guy. He can do it for you. And I'm like, okay, sounds great. But why are they so expensive? It's $300 to $500 a backlink. And then they were getting us into these articles or getting our guest posts in an article or into sites that were so bad that I'm like, I can't be associated with this content. But it was but I didn't have a concept of what it was. So in the end, not only were we okay, let's own our SEO, we were let's own all of our digital marketing, learn what that is. And then I went to Respana and looked at and learned about backlinking and link building outreach from their blogs and from their founder. So we kind of just, and then when we had a concept, then we started hiring dedicated people for it, but it wasn't for a long time. And also wasting about $50K hiring these people that were just doing stuff for us, but the quality was just laughable. So biggest lesson there is that you can't hire someone to take your pain away when you don't have a basic understanding of what that job is to be done.
Yeah, I didn't know this. I didn't know this, but now I'm it's much easier for me to recognize when this is happening. Not even when we don't go out to hire someone. It's because that impulse is still there. You want somebody to just fix it for you. And you're like, okay, I need to take a step back and understand what this is before I can even think about hiring somebody to help me. And even when we did start hiring people, we were still managing the execution of the strategy, right? Because we were trying to learn, and they weren't driving it. They were supporting us. Right. And so, it took a long time for, like, how long did it take for us to hire a full-time content writer for our blog? It was time. It was like, okay, we know this enough now that we can bring someone in, and we know how to measure their success.
Yeah. I mean, on the same topic, like, I was sitting on, like, hiring someone for, to manage my content, right? Like, to, like a social media assistant. Like, I produce so much content. Like, my entire job is producing content for eWebinar, like whether it's LinkedIn or, Instagram or TikTok, like these mini videos, this podcast, other people's podcasts, writing newsletters. Like, I produce so much content, but I was managing all that myself. But it got to a point where I'm like, I really want to hire someone. Who do I hire? And because of this experience, I was hesitating for so long, because I'm like, well, I also don't know what a content manager is. So then I went to talk to a friend who specializes in social media, and I was actually going to hire someone. I was going to engage with a recruiting company, somewhere.com, that actually hires from, like, whether it's Colombia or Philippines or whatnot. And I had this job description written by my friend who specializes in social media. But I'm also reading this, like, because I basically told the recruiting company, I'm like, I would love to work with someone who was an assistant to an influencer, so that person could tell me what to do. But at the end of the day, like, I go back to this concept of, like, I just can't hire someone when I don't understand the task. So in the end, I just did my own, like, I implemented my own system. I did it for 3 weeks. And then I passed it to a junior person on our team that used to be an intern, but now is full time. But now I have my own system that this person adopted, and it's mine. Right? I'm not adapting to someone else. It's just like, okay, well, next week you have to write this. Like, that's all I need. I need to know next week, what do I need to write when? Like, point me to the Google sheet so I can fill in the blanks, and then you can, push it out. There's things that I still manage, like my LinkedIn posts I manage, my newsletter I manage, but everything else now has someone else doing it and telling me what to do, which is because I learned from these early days.
Hey, I'd like to take a second here to talk about my own company, eWebinar, and our mission to rescue people from what I call webinar hell, to give them back their time and save them literally hundreds of hours every month through webinar automation. If your sales team is tired of doing the same demo over and over for unqualified leads, or worse, prospects who don't even show up, an on-demand demo powered by eWebinar can help them get their time back so they can close more deals. If you're doing customer onboarding and training on repeat, eWebinar can help you automate those so you never have to do them live again. Customer success teams are using eWebinar to run hundreds of sessions every single month without a live host. Why don't you give our product a try and see for yourself? Visit ewebinar.com to join our own on-demand demo or to sign up for a free trial. All right, now that I've gotten that on my system, let's get back to the episode.
The fourth one that we spent money on, that we shouldn't have, is ad consultants, that we were way too early for. So we spent about $15K on that. I mean, I think net is like no early stage startup should be spending money on paid ads, but we did not know that. No, because I'm from a sales-led background. So my entire life before eWebinar was like cold calling, emailing, going to conferences, like hang out in the lobby, like lobby conning, without a ticket because I couldn't afford it. But like, I thought that, everybody tells you how they think you can make money. So, people are like, if you spend $2 or spend $1 buying ads and you make $2, you're winning. Everybody says that, right? Sounds great. I want to do that because we were running out of leads. And every single ad buyer that we talked to was like, oh, you can start with as little as $500 a month. We can test the language and you can pay me $1,500 or $2,000 retainer. So it's like ad spend plus this person's like part-time rate or whatever it is. But But none of these people ever tell you, oh, by the way, you're way too early and you're actually competing with massive companies who are spending a lot more money than you. Like $500 is not enough to have any meaningful impact. And nobody tells you, yes, the holy grail is spending $1 to make $2, but nobody tells you the amount of time and resource and experimenting and expertise that is required to figure out that machine.
Yeah, I mean, I think we also had another problem too, which was we didn't know how to reach people, because an ad needs to be a scroll stopper, right? Like, it's something that, like, when you see it, you understand not only the pain of what it's communicating, but you understand the potential solution that the software is offering. And automated webinars is something that people don't get. It's just they don't get it. And so we tried some messaging, but like there was a larger problem too that needed to be solved around messaging. Like scroll stopping for us, it was just not working.
Well, it still isn't, right? Like, in order for your ad to work, you have like split seconds, like someone's scrolling. You have split seconds before they stop and think, oh, like this might be interesting. So you have to be in a mature product category. They have to get exactly what you do, or you have to have a big name to stop them from it. And we're not that. We're a niche product. Not many people know about us. There isn't enough space on the advertising to give education, nor is there enough time for someone scrolling to actually consume that. But an ad buyer should have known this, in theory.
I mean, I think that just like SEO agencies, ad buyers, any consultant you hire, first of all, they want to get paid, right? They want to make money. But I think they always think they can figure it out, that they know from their experience, they can figure it out. So I don't think that it's like they're not withholding, but there's no way that's the other thing with consultants, is they're just not close enough to your business to be able to diagnose these problems. And so,
I don't think anybody admits that they can't take a company from 0 to 1. And maybe they don't know, because most people haven't done that. Most people haven't gone through that path, right? A lot of people come in and there's already something to work from. But the other issue that you just reminded me of is that was when we hired these people, we had not talked to our customers. So we didn't know how our product should be positioned. We had no idea who we were selling to. We were guessing. We were giving these guys the information that we knew, and they were working off that information, but we didn't know for sure.
Yeah, I also think that we were at that time, I mean, I know we were thinking about competing in our category, which people didn't even know our category. Automated webinar software. Our real competition is live webinars, right? Repetitive live webinars. And even now though, I'm very skeptical that any type of ad for us could work. We don't have enough name recognition, and people really need to take a mental leap. It's our biggest challenge. It's our biggest challenge in reaching new customers.
But I think the ROI for ads are becoming lower and lower because people don't like to be sold to. The volume of people is there, which means the conversion is much lower, but the volume is justifying the ad price. So for your ad to work, you have to have a high ticket item. Ours in the beginning was $49. Now it's $99, but you can't spend enough money to make up for that, right? We can't buy a billboard on the highway. And we tried, I think, 2 consultants over 8 months. And the other problem that we learned, the other thing that we learned, which was a shock to me, by the way, the person who writes the ad and the person who buys the ad and the person who optimizes the funnel for the ad are 3 people. You'd be so lucky if they know how to do 2 of the 3 things. And even more rare if they can do all 3. Usually they cannot. Maybe if they write it, they can also buy it. But the person who optimizes the funnel is actually a completely different person who knows how to A/B test and do all this nifty stuff. People that know how to write creative ads are kind of a different breed. So the first person we worked with didn't write, which meant we wrote for this person, but we don't know how to write ads. So we were just and then in the beginning when ads weren't converting, I thought that the messaging wasn't good enough. So we were just trying different messaging. But in the end, I'm like, we're not spending enough money. We're not a product category that people understand. And the reason we know that is because they come into our demo and they'll be like, so how does this work? So if you don't know from our demo how it works, how can you tell by a scrolling ad how it works?
Yeah, our demo that uses our product to demo our product. So you're literally having the experience of the product and you still don't understand how it works.
Yeah, and we tried to do like customer stories that were ads. We tried to like target a certain persona. And the thing is like, why couldn't we fire fast? It's one of those things where you want to give it enough time.
And you want it to work because you feel like if you can get some return, and it's consistent, then yeah, it's worth regularly spending money on it.
I mean, everybody tells you that you just need more time. You're not giving enough time. And maybe sometimes that's true, but it's really hard to know when you've never done it before. So from that point on, we ended up we pulled the plug on that and we just do, I guess, retargeting. I don't even know.
Yeah, we do very little, basically just retargeting and really advertising against our own name and maybe a couple of other things. But also we rank so well for the keywords that people are searching for that, this is one of the things that I learned is that a lot of times venture-backed startups they're so well funded that they just pour money into ads and they don't even try to optimize any keywords for SEO because they're just like, we'll buy it. That's how we'll get to the top of the list. And so those keywords are wide open for you to grab if you're in a category like that. And we did do that a little bit where I went into spaces that were so crowded and we were able to get into the top 3 within a week because nobody was trying to even get there. They were just pouring money on ads. So, there's other reasons to not do ads too. There's especially if you're in a category where you're competing against better known names or better funded names.
So the fifth one, the fifth wrong hire, which is of course my most painful, expensive mistake, which we talked about on episode 16, or 130,000 mistake in affiliate marketing. So people are like, how did you waste so much money on that? Well, okay, the real reason was because we hired somebody to come on board to manage that strategy who had a lot of success in big, well-resourced companies that are not as fast-moving as startups. And that person's salary was the highest at the time, higher than like you and David. I wasn't paying myself, but that was a big deal. But that was an indication of how much we believed in that strategy and how much we wanted it to work. It's like when we try something, we really try something. Like we want to make sure that we don't regret not putting our best foot forward, but sometimes that can work against you. And, we're working for startups this person it wasn't a big company that he's had a lot of successes in. It definitely wasn't like a small startup, but I think he had the mentality of a startup guy. So, but never had real experience. So I didn't really know that mentality doesn't translate into the agility that we as a tiny company actually need. Like people from corporate just don't have the same urgency. They do not work on the same timeline. They don't have the same scrappiness. And the problem was the reason why we couldn't pull the plug on it, even though I saw it, in month 5 or 6, was because, this person was a friend. I spent time convincing them to take our opportunity versus someone else. And this person was taking a 50% pay cut to join our team. Right? And so we were competing with a larger company that's double the salary. That is a lot. So when someone's like, I really want to make a difference in your company, I'm going to choose you over that thing. You're now emotionally invested. Like I'm emotionally invested. And I know that I tried too hard for too long to make it work, but it wasn't possible. At that moment in time, I did not have the professional and emotional maturity to end that relationship. And hence, I was too optimistic for too long, but I just really wanted it to work. And it always seemed like there was some success around the corner, right? This person had really good work ethic, right? Like they were a really good person, just not for where we were at that particular point in time. Like they would have been very successful somewhere else where the product is mature, the product sells itself, the product price point is higher, right? There's so many issues, which we talked about on episode 16 about like why affiliate marketing does not work for a small company. So when you hire someone to manage that, which by the way, it is a full-time job, like that's where a lot of money gets spent, even if you're not spending money on like buying sponsorships or whatnot, which is like another expense.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things too. It's very much like ads where people are like, it's just money sitting out there for you to grab. Affiliate marketing, you know what I mean? It's just like, it's just waiting for you. And if the circumstances are right, that is true. But it wasn't. And I was watching it secondhand, right? Because I wasn't dealing with, you were sort of working with him directly, but I could see that everybody wanted to make it work, right? So there was this tremendous amount of goodwill, but it wasn't working. I mean, when I say it wasn't working, this is a revenue generating position that was hired that was not generating revenue.
But I think the main thing I learned, outside of obviously affiliate marketing is not a good channel. I mean, it's not a go-to-market strategy, which we try to use it as a growth strategy. But I guess the biggest thing I learned is like, no matter how much a person believes that they're a startup person, unless you have been a startup person and you do not value what corporate gives you, like you do not value high paying jobs and security and time, like, and insurance, you cannot hire a big company person to be in your startup. Like they're just in a different world, but it works both ways, right? Like a startup person can't work in a big company. Like they're not going to last.
Yeah, I think I lasted in the larger corporations that I was in for as long as I did because I was given so much freedom to do things my own way, right? So, but yeah, it does go both ways.
I mean, the most expensive thing for all of these hires is not money, right? It's the time that you've spent on trying to make that work. And then of course, rehiring costs is high, or whatever salary you paid out is high. And sometimes in my case, it was friendships, right? Like I think a lot of people listening to this would be like, oh, I would never hire a friend, but never say never. It's like sometimes people are your friend because you like them. You don't always hire someone you don't know, especially in a startup. Like you have to compete for talent. And you make friends because you like them, because they're smart, because you see them being successful. So then you want them to be a part of your company, right? And not all of these costs can be avoided, right? But I do think they can be mitigated by firing fast.
So let's talk about how the backlash from your LinkedIn post, because people got really riled up. Why do you think that happened? Like, how is firing fast? How was it perceived? Yeah. 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 And also bootstrapped, right? Which is important too. So like your resources are very limited. So when you hire someone, it is a big deal, so it's not like, go meet with HR.
What I hope people to know about firing fast is it doesn't mean like you're ripping somebody out of their chair, right? Like it means that, at least for a founder like me who's really new to all this stuff, is like it means like listening to your gut, right? Knowing when someone really doesn't work. And sometimes you just know. When you know, you can convince yourself, but when you know. And separating that cognitive decision with your emotions. And then being really honest to them and to yourself about missed expectations. Because it would have been so easy for me to be like, okay, it's been 6 months. We have $500 of revenue attributed to you. You're a revenue position. What's going on? Right. And I was so afraid to set those expectations and say them out loud because I didn't want to offend this person. But at the same time, every dollar going to that person is not going to you or David or me, who was not getting paid at all. And there was a finite amount of money before we could break even and start like really paying ourselves. So I was also looking at the projections as I do. I update them every month. So I was feeling nervous about that too. And so it also means like, as a founder, like having the clarity and awareness to know like when you really need to move on because it's just not working out. And sometimes it's us, right? Sometimes it's them, right? It could be like a company culture thing. And in some cases, it's like when I say company culture, it's like they're not moving fast enough because we are a startup and we don't have weeks to do this. And sometimes it's just both people.
Yeah. And sometimes it's a little bit of like circumstance, like we weren't ready for affiliate marketing. Right. So, it can be a combination of things, but you can't say we didn't try on all of these things. We really tried to make it work.
Yeah. And it's really, really hard unless you are, unless you're versed in this, to have the confidence and the courage to have a very hard conversation with someone you actually like. Because it's the right thing to do for the company and for their career. Like it cannot feel good to be in a job where you're taking a paycheck, where it's a bootstrap company and you're constantly not seeing success. You're not paying for yourself. Yeah, maybe first few months, get it. Like you need to be onboarded, but 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, like you must feel bad about that.
Yeah. And it sucks to fail. Right. So even there's the money part of it. It was also just like the frustration of trying to make something work and it's not working. So, like keeping someone in a position where they could go somewhere else and flourish and make more money and, feel better about what they're doing. That's also, that's the other side of it is that you're.
Yeah. And I think while it sounds dismissive, like it is so dismissive, right? Fire fast. I think the reality with a lot of companies like ours is it's the complete opposite. Like we can get better at it a lot. Like in hindsight, we fire too slow, but it's very likely that we actually fought really long and hard for that person. We tried to make it work because we want to be optimistic because getting someone to come on our team is so hard. And it just took a long time before we came to that difficult decision to actually, let them go. And now I know, having these experiences, it's not ruthlessness, right? It's just being discerning. Like we have to be super discerning about, whether this person fits into our culture. Are they going to deliver? Do they really understand startups and how fast we have to move? And can they pay for themselves? Like, is the value that they're giving us congruent with what we're paying them?
Yeah. And it is it's always the best thing for both parties to end the relationship and move on. And that's sort of like, because again, no one wants to fail.
Yeah. I mean, I think firing fast allows you to do two things, which is like cut your losses as a company, right? Either you find someone more suited or you change strategies. And in many cases, we ended up firing this person or these people or this company, but we didn't hire another person. We just changed strategies. Like we learned that we didn't actually need that at this time. And the second thing is like we want to let the other person go to find a role that's better suited for them. It's like any relationship, right? You see friends that are in like relationships that should just end. And you're like, please stop holding each other back and let them go to find someone more suitable for them. Like everybody deserves to go to a job that gives them success, that they can feel happy about, that they feel like a contributing factor, especially in a startup. Like you don't want to just take a paycheck.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to feel like you're making an impact, even if it's hard.
Yeah. And I think a lot of companies like us, I think we definitely had multiple conversations with all of those scenarios that we talked about. And something I want to reiterate is like for people to realize like that in order to compete for talent, we really have to inspire people, sometimes work on them for months and treat them, like family, and give them whatever we can, like what the highest salary that we can at the time, because we simply can't compete with a funded startup, a cooler startup, right? If they had an office or if they're an SF or whatever, like we're a fully remote team. I think a lot of companies are like us that are like starting out, right? So when somebody doesn't work out and we've invested all this time and hope in them, then the pain is like felt very deep, right? It's not just money. It's like an emotional investment. So every dollar that every dollar going to the wrong thing is a dollar not going to the right thing, right? And we're always making concessions elsewhere. So when someone is there and they're not really delivering, or we feel like it's the wrong strategy, we start to think like, okay, well, where else can we spend this, right? And we're not talking like small amounts. We're talking like tens of thousands of dollars. Yeah, and I think that's why, like for all these reasons, especially for non-venture backed startups, like this is why firing fast is so important.
So how do you think, looking back on all this, how has it changed how we hire and fire?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely made me less optimistic, like less hopeful. Like I'm not like I want to see actual deliverables, right, before we actually invest more time and more money into a person. And it's this whole concept of firing fast and letting someone go. Like it's so important that we demand it from our own team, because we cannot afford not to have passionate, dedicated people on our side. So what does that mean, right? During the interview, when I know that we want to bring someone onto our team, like I tell them this story of like, what happened when we didn't let someone go like fast enough, and how that hurts us, and how we're only looking for people who want to be with us long term, who are passionate to invest in us, who understand our product and want to be a part of it. And we ask them that the moment they're thinking about leaving, of firing us, that they need to tell us as soon as possible. And I even tell them, if we are a stepping stone, please do me this favor and don't come on the team, because we cannot. We want to bring you on, but to rehire you is going to be a pain and super expensive, because we want to train people up to manage themselves. We don't micromanage. And once they're on their own, we like almost never talk to them.
Yeah. And look, if you want to use a big company as a stepping stone, fine. Like they'll be able to much more easily absorb that kind of thing. But for a company of our size, it is so hard to have someone come on, train them, and then have them leave. It's brutal.
And we've had situations where I've had this conversation. This person was like, I'm not going to be that person. And this person was so smart, like so amazing. 2 months later, oh yeah, I'm leaving. I'm like, what? So you can do whatever you can in your power. People are still going to make their own decisions. But at least what I do now is I have that conversation up front. I let them know that this is painful. We want to invest in them. And if you want to go to if you want to go to another type of company, so that's another like question I like to ask is like, if you could work on anything right now, what would it be? Is it a type of company? Is it a company? Because I could just refer you there. Like I'd rather you do that. And life is too short to work on something that you don't like. If you want to work for a gaming company, work for a gaming company. Don't waste your time with us. Right. And so I think that like it's like firing fast is like such a painful concept, but we need to learn it. Everybody needs to learn it, because What makes a business successful is the team. And it only, like, a person that could be an A player somewhere else might be a B player with you. And that's what happened to us.
And, it can also breed resentment too, when it's such a small team and some people are succeeding and are moving fast, and they're seeing that, one of their peers, even in another part of the company, because you're so small, is not. It's like, why are we spending time and effort on that? So, it can also infect your team.
With A players and B players, like, it only takes one B player before an A player feels like, well, then I can be a B player. It's like any group, right? Any group dynamic. And the other thing that really shifted for us is we only hire not just the best person for the role, but the most senior person for the role. Because we are a remote team, because people need to self-manage and self-motivate, because we don't have meetings and don't micromanage, it's senior people who's already had some sort of career. Maybe they have young families. They really value staying at home. They don't want to be bothered. Those are the people that work best in our work environment. So it's actually better for us to pay more, hire someone senior who really values the things we're able to give them more than salary, right? And so, like, we stopped, like, in the beginning, we would hire some juniors because we're like, oh, we can cultivate them. But junior people need to and enjoy learning in an in-person environment through osmosis, right? There's a socializing aspect that we can't give them, right? And every time we hired someone junior, like, I think people like the idea of being remote, like fully remote, but not everybody can, like, really work alone.
Yeah, and I think that is true more of junior people, right? Because you can't replace that in-person experience. You really can't.
So, like, we started our careers in person.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I had, like, more than 10 years working in an office.
Yeah,
before.
and you just sort of take that for granted. And it's like, no, you learn so much by observing how other people work and by observing how senior people work, right? And by the way, I think it's important to clarify, because senior is something that gets used a lot in the corporate world, like a senior person. But this is a senior person who's experienced and can thrive in a startup, right? It's not like hiring a senior executive from a corporation. It's more like someone who has the experience enough to know that they are willing to take a risk on a bootstrapped startup because they know what they want. They know the trade-off that they're gaining. They're maybe willing to be paid less money for it, whatever that is. But they're coming in with experience and their eyes wide open.
Yeah. The other thing that we do is we have a try before you buy concept, right? We don't jump into anything with anyone. Like, we've learned from our mistakes. We do have a team of contractors, but everyone is not everyone. Most people are full-time. Like, we have some writers, some designers that are, like, as needed, but most people are contractors by design because they're not in the country that where we're incorporated. So they have to be a contractor, and maybe they have some, like, side hustles. But we always, like, either have a probation period or we start with a project that they would work on before we actually bring them on full-time. And even if we work through dev shops for all of our developers, we do the same thing. Like, if somebody comes in and, like, because somebody left, like, we have them working on a very specific thing before we see, okay, is this someone that we want to actually have on our team full time? And we also now, having that experience of spending a lot of money, we only hire when we absolutely have to. So what does that mean? Because we do all these things by ourselves, we hire when we can no longer take on that task, right? It's like, yes, you can write, you're a good writer, but it no longer makes sense for you to do it because you're spending all your time doing that and no time on the product. And, like, for me, it was like, oh, I was spending so much time managing my own content and I was so disorganized that, like, I was no longer productive if I didn't have a content manager or an assistant that just told me, like, every Friday or every Monday, these are the things you have to write. These are the things that are going out.
Yeah. And you feel that pain. When there's something else you should be paying attention to that you can't. And the pain outweighs the like cost of bringing in someone new. Cause that's hard. It's hard to bring someone up to speed in a way where they can become almost completely self-managed. Like, with our main marketing content writer now, like when he delivers a draft for me to review, it is a very simple process now. And it took us a long time to get there. It got progressively better and better. But it became a necessity for me to stop spending that much time on content. But also, I knew at that point that I knew enough to be able to manage someone else, right? So it was a combination of the two things. I understood the task enough to quote unquote outsource it. Not really outsourcing, but yeah, that became a necessity, no question. Just to summarize what we talked about our 5 wrong hires, and what firing fast is and is not for those people who brutally criticized us. And then what we changed after learning from those experiences in terms of how we hire and fire in our process now. So from that recap, what's your hot take for today?
My hot take is probably everyone else's hot take. Every founder's hot take is like finding great people will always be the biggest challenge. Always. I think there's less and less of them out there nowadays. As people are becoming more independent, they can work from home, they have a lot more choices. But people are your greatest asset, and your team will be the reason that you succeed, and how much and how fast. So you can't let that slow you down. Ultimately, you have to do, what's required. But I think hiring is like anything else. You have to keep trying and learning how to do it better. And doing it is hiring better, but also like firing better. What is your hot take?
I mean, being in a position where I'm not responsible for hiring and firing in the way you are, right? So like I'm in the process of hiring, but it's just not the same. I'm not the one who actually has to have those hard conversations, or I haven't had to have them yet. I just think about, this is something actually we talked about more in the last episode, is that you can't hire someone if you don't understand what they need to do. You've got to have an understanding of their function so you know what success looks like. So then you can evaluate whether or not it's working, so you know whether to fire fast, right? Because if you have no frickin' idea, then you'll never be able to tell whether or not they need to go quickly. So that's the other thing that I would just throw into the mix.
If you've been enjoying this podcast, I've got a small favor to ask. The only way Profit Led grows is by word of mouth. So if you'll do us a favor and hit the subscribe or follow button wherever you're listening or watching this podcast right now, it'd mean the world to us, and help us continue to spend time making these episodes for you. Ping me on LinkedIn if there are particular topics you want us to get into this season. Send me any feedback you have on this podcast, because I love hearing from you. My name is Melissa Kwan, last name spelled Kwan. To get notified of new episodes, join our mailing list by going to profitled.fm. I promise to only share things you'll actually care about. Thanks for listening. Bye now.